My name is Eliza May Sutton, and I've lived 87 years. Some folks say a long life is a blessing from the Lord, but I've learned that time isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's just a long, slow road you walk carrying a weight that don't belong to you. I was born here in Hollow Creek, West Virginia, and I reckon I'll die here too. This town is tucked away in the hills, like a secret nobody cares to keep. The world rushed on by, but it never bothered to climb our dirt roads or quiet the whisper of the wind through the pines. Even now, when I sit on this old porch, the only sounds are the screen door groaning on its hinges and the lonely toll of the chapel bell marking time that only seems to matter around here. I live in the house my mother left me, a place where the walls hold more silence than memories. The paint's peeling something fierce, and the roof sings a mournful song when the rain comes, but it's the only home I've ever known. From this porch, I can smell the damp earth after a storm and the wood smoke from my neighbor's chimney. It's a small town, the kind where everybody knows your name, your people, and the stories they think they know about you. The weight of their gazes can feel heavier than a winter blanket, even when you're all alone. They see an old woman, quiet and kept to herself, a bit of a fixture like the old oak tree in the town square. They see the hands gnarled and stained from a lifetime of work in the soil and wringing out sorrows. They see what they want to see. But there's a story behind these tired eyes that they never dared to ask about. A truth I've held in my throat for so long, it feels like a fishbone stuck right where the words are meant to come out. It's a story about how the real monsters ain't the ones that hide in the dark. They're the ones who sit in the front pew on Sunday, smiling and shaking the preacher's hand. The ones whose names are spoken with respect while they build a private hell inside the four walls of a home. I've learned that a secret, especially a rotten one, doesn't die. It just seeps into the ground, poisoning everything that tries to grow. After 87 years, I'm tired of tending to a poisoned garden. I'm speaking now because the silence is finally heavier than the truth. I need to pull this weed up by the roots, no matter what comes down with it. If you're listening, if you've ever felt the chill of a secret you were forced to keep, then maybe you'll understand. If you like the beginning of this story, like, share, and subscribe. There's more coming. The monster in my story had a name, and it was a name the whole of Hollow Creek respected, Jedediah Cartwright. To everyone who walked down Main Street, he was a pillar of this town, as sturdy and dependable as the stone walls of the chapel he helped build. He owned Cartwright's General Mercantile, the place where you'd get your flour, your nails, your news. On Sundays, he'd sit in the very first pew, his big calloused hand resting on a leather-bound Bible. My mother, Willa, was a quiet shadow by his side. Folks would tip their hats. "Morning, Mr. Cartwright. A fine sermon, wasn't it, Jedediah?" They listened to him. They looked up to him. And in their own way, they feared him. His word was law, not just in our town, but within the four walls of our home. But the man they all saw, the decent church-going family man, he didn't live with us. The creature that shared our roof was something else entirely. He wasn't a father. He was an owner. He owned the chairs we sat on, the hours we kept, the very air we breathed. And eventually, he decided he owned me too. I was only 12, still more child than anything else, a skinny thing with scraped knees and a mind full of dandelion wishes. My body had just begun whispering about the woman I was supposed to become one day, changes I didn't rightly understand. There was no warning, no single moment of dread before it happened. It was just an ordinary Tuesday, the air thick with the smell of my mother's baking. He came into my room with the scent of tobacco and cheap whiskey clinging to him like a second skin. He shut the door. The look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before, a flat, hungry look that made the air go thin with a quiet that was more terrifying than any shout. He stole what wasn't his to take. He turned me into a woman without my permission, without my understanding. He broke something inside me that day, something so deep I didn't even know it had a name. When it was over, the silence that fell was louder than any scream. He just stood up, straightened his shirt like he'd just been setting down a heavy box, and walked out, leaving me to drown in the quiet. And my mother Willa, she knew. In a house as small as ours, with walls as thin as secrets, there's no hiding a sin that big. She must have heard. But she never said a word. She just kept on with her chores, her hands moving with a purpose my own body had forgotten how to have. The next morning, she wouldn't look at me. She just kept her eyes on the floor, on the dough she was kneading, on anything but the daughter who had a ghost living behind her eyes. That night, she left a tin cup of bitter-smelling tea by my bedside. She stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the hall light. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "Don't you say a word, Eliza. You hear me? God sees everything." That sentence has haunted me my whole life. It echoed in my head for years, a constant, terrible reminder. If God saw everything, why was he so quiet? If he saw that little girl bleeding in a bed that wasn't safe anymore, why didn't he send a flood? Why didn't he strike that man down with a bolt of lightning? But God stayed silent, just like my mother, just like the whole world, it seemed. I was alone in that house with my shame, and I learned the hardest lesson a child can learn. The people who are supposed to protect you are sometimes the very monsters you need protection from. And the silence, I came to find, wasn't just silence. It was poison. It didn't just hide the truth. It helped it grow. There are times when silence is more than just a lack of words. It's a weight that presses down on you, settles deep into your bones, and makes it harder to breathe. That was my life for so long. Silence wrapped itself around me, thicker than the dust that gathers in the corners of a forgotten room. I was raised on it, taught to swallow it down, to hold it close like a secret that nobody should know. You know, when you're a little girl, you're supposed to feel safe, supposed to feel protected by the very people who brought you into the world. But for me, safety was a foreign concept. And as I grew, I learned that my silence was both my shield and my prison. I never spoke the truth, not once, for fear that the walls of my world would crumble if I did. I was a prisoner in my own home, bound by my own fear. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to say it all out loud, the words I'd been choking on for so long, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear the thought of being cast out, of having the only people I had left in the world look at me like I was some kind of monster. I feared they would push me away, pretend like I didn't exist anymore, just as I had been forced to pretend nothing was wrong. I remember the first time I ever wanted to speak. I was only 18. I had my first child in my arms, little Caleb, and I had just finished cleaning him up. My father had gone out to the barn, my mother had gone to bed, and the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor, the weight of the secret like 1,000 bricks on my heart. I wanted to tell her, wanted to scream into the silence and say, "Mom, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I can't carry this alone." But I couldn't. My mother, who had never spoken of her own pain, who had lived under the same shadow I had, would never understand. And even if she did, she would never speak up. She never did. So I remained silent. The years dragged on, one after another, like a train I couldn't escape. I gave birth to more children, Toby, Rebecca, Sadie. They came one by one, each time a reminder that nothing had changed. Each one a tiny reflection of my tormentor, each one a piece of the monster he had created. And I just kept going. I smiled, I fed them, I did my duty. I was just a girl, trying to survive, hiding behind the apron of a mother who never knew peace. Every day I felt myself dying a little bit more. My body ached from the weight of the lies I carried, from the days filled with nothing but silence. But that silence wasn't just my own. It was my mother's too. She was bound by it as well. In a house this small, there's no hiding anything. She must have known. But she kept silent too, and I hated her for it. I hated that she didn't protect me, that she let it happen. I hated that she pretended she didn't see it. But I didn't have the strength to confront her. Not then. I didn't have the courage. Every time I tried to speak, I found myself swallowed by the fear of losing everything I had left. The thought of being abandoned, of having my family turn their backs on me. It was unbearable. So I stayed silent, and for years I thought silence was the only thing I had left. But as I grew older, something started to shift inside me. I don't know if it was age or just the realization that I was running out of time. But one day, when I was sitting on this very porch, I made a decision. I had to speak. But I couldn't shake the shame. Even at 77, with death knocking at my door, the thought of revealing the truth felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The wind howled in my ears, and the ground below seemed like nothing but emptiness. What if they didn't believe me? What if they pushed me away, like I feared they would all those years ago? But the anger, the frustration, the suffocating silence, it became too much to bear. I had carried it all my life, and now, with each day growing shorter, I realized something important. I couldn't die with this secret. The truth had to be heard. Even though my mother's silence had been my constant companion, I couldn't follow in her footsteps. Even though I feared what my children would think of me, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I had to speak, even if it meant losing everything. I had to let the world know what had happened to me, what had happened in this house, under the roof that was supposed to protect me. And so here I am, sitting on this porch, about to tell the story I've kept locked in my heart for decades. I wish I had found the strength sooner. Maybe I could have saved some of my children from the same fate. Maybe I could have stopped the cycle from repeating. But I didn't. And for that, I carry the heaviest kind of guilt, the kind that comes from knowing the silence was my choice too. I chose to stay quiet, even though every part of me screamed for help, but no more. The silence ends here, today, and maybe, just maybe, this last act of speaking the truth will be the one thing I can still do for myself, and for them. I never asked for this. I didn't ask to be a mother at 14, nor did I ask to be a prisoner to my own body. But somewhere between the first trembling whispers of adolescence and the deafening silence that followed, I became both a vessel and a victim. Each pregnancy was a shackle, a reminder that I had no control over my own life. My body, once a place for my childhood dreams, had become a machine for survival, a cold, unfeeling engine that churned out child after child, each one more painful than the last. I didn't have the luxury of choosing. I didn't have the choice to say no, to leave, to escape the man who was both my father and my tormentor. There was no choice when I was just a girl, my body at war with itself, and my spirit drowning in a sea of shame and fear. The first time I knew I was pregnant, it hit me like a slap in the face. I was 14, still a child myself, and yet my body had already betrayed me. The sickness came quickly. Every morning I was hunched over, gasping for breath, my stomach twisting and turning in rebellion against the life growing inside of me. But the worst part wasn't the sickness. It was the silence that came after. My father never said a word when he saw me pale and hollow-eyed. My mother, she didn't even look at me. We had a routine by then. My father would continue to sit in his chair by the fire, his heavy eyes never once meeting mine. His hands would rest on the arms of the chair, cold and stiff, as if he were already planning his next move. My mother would be in the kitchen, moving about in silence, her hands working with purpose, but her eyes fixed on the floor. I don't think I even told her that I was pregnant. There was no need. She knew. She always knew. There were no words for it, not even between us. She just did what she always did. She would tell me to be careful, to stop looking so sickly, to keep my head down. That was her way of telling me to keep quiet. Keep quiet. Be still. Don't let anyone see you break. The second pregnancy came not long after the first, and with it the same crushing weight, the same silence. But this time I tried to leave. I tried to run. I thought just once I could get away, that I could be free from the cage my body had become. I packed a bag with clothes I never wore, grabbed my coat, and tiptoed to the back door, heart hammering against my ribs. But I didn't get far. No, he found me before I could make it past the fence. He always did. He always had a way of knowing, a way of making sure I didn't escape. My feet were still in the yard when I heard the door creak open behind me. His voice, low, menacing, like a snake hissing in my ear, cut through the night. "Where do you think you're going, girl?" I froze. My heart was 1,000 miles away, beating too loud for me to hear anything else. "Nowhere," I whispered, my hands trembling at my sides. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there in the doorway, watching me, his eyes dark like the shadows around us. "You think you can leave me?" he finally said, his voice slow, deliberate. "You think you can leave this? You're mine." And just like that, I wasn't running anymore. I couldn't. The fear held me in place, and I was forced to walk back into the house, back into my cage. I was only 15 when the third child came, and by then I had learned not to ask questions. I had learned to turn my mind off when he came near, to shut off the part of me that screamed for help, for escape. My body wasn't my own anymore. It was a tool, a machine, a way for him to do what he pleased, and it hurt. Each new pregnancy was like a dagger to my soul, but I never showed it. I couldn't. By the time I had my 6th child, I was hollow. I had given everything I had, my youth, my dreams, my sense of self. And all that was left was a body that was no more than a shell. My children were all I had left, but they were also a reminder of the life I could never escape. With every kick inside my womb, I could feel my spirit retreating a little further into the dark corners of my mind. I wasn't even living anymore. I was just existing. I did the things a mother was supposed to do. I fed them, I cleaned them, I took care of them. But I was a shadow, and they were the light. I gave them everything I had, and in return they gave me nothing but dependence and the reminder of my servitude. I was trapped, not just in the house, but in my own body. Every month, another cycle of fear, another cycle of life that didn't belong to me, but to him, the man who had stolen everything from me, the man who had made me his possession, his slave, his tool for procreation. There was no escape, no freedom, and the hardest part, the part I could never escape, the fact that I had no control over my own life. My body was not mine. My choices were not mine. And I couldn't break free. I didn't have the strength to leave. I didn't have the courage to stand up for myself. All I had left was my children. They were the only thing keeping me tethered to this world. But even they reminded me of everything I had lost. And every time I looked into their eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, were they mine or were they his? I kept quiet. I stayed still. I played my part, a mother, a servant, a body that had long since given up on being free. There is a deep ache in my chest when I think about how he got away with it, how all those years he walked around free of consequences, untouched, like a king in his own house, like a god among men. I hated him for that. But more than hate, I felt a cold, hollow bitterness in my soul, the kind that gnaws at you, the kind that eats away at the very core of who you are. You see, for all the horrors he inflicted on me, for all the ways he broke me, there was no punishment, not even in death. He died, yes, but he never paid for what he did. And that's the worst kind of justice, isn't it? The kind that doesn't come at all. I remember the whispers after he died. People said it was peaceful and he'd had a long life. To the world, he was just another old man who had passed away. To them, Jedediah Cartwright was still the same respected figure, pillar of the church, provider, father, never a man with blood on his hands, not a monster who'd turned his daughter into a tool for his own desires. It was always the same. No one ever saw the truth, not even my own children. I tried, God knows I tried, to speak out. I tried to find someone, anyone, who might understand, who might help me. But every time I reached out, I was met with cold silence. My voice, no matter how loud I screamed inside my own mind, was never heard. I was just a girl back then, too scared to even knock on a neighbor's door, too afraid that my cries would be seen as nothing but the ramblings of a foolish girl. How could I tell them? How could I tell the world that my father, the man who was supposed to love and protect me, was the very one who had broken me over and over again? I couldn't. I couldn't because I knew what would happen. I knew what they would say. And worse still, I knew how they would look at me. A girl who cries wolf, a liar, a shameful burden on a good man's name. It wasn't just fear, though. It was more than that. It was isolation, the kind that wraps around your soul and tightens with every passing day. It was the knowledge that if I went outside these four walls, if I told anyone, I would lose everything. And when you have nothing, you don't risk losing it all for something that seems so impossible. How could I make them see what was really happening in this house when the world had already decided who my father was? A man with honor, with strength, a man who had done no wrong. I thought about it, you know. I thought about running. I thought about telling someone, calling the law maybe. But the fear paralyzed me, the fear that my name would be ruined, the fear that I would be turned out, cast aside like trash, and the world would never care to know the truth. The world back then didn't give second chances to girls like me. It didn't give a damn about what happened behind closed doors. My father was too good at covering his tracks, too good at playing the role of the strong, respectable man. Everyone around me, my family, the neighbors, even the preacher, saw him as the model of a father, a man who had made something of himself, a man who had earned his place in the world. No one would believe me. And if they did, what would happen? What would be the cost of dragging such filth into the light? In the end, I stayed silent, year after year. Silent, because silence was the only thing that kept me from being completely swallowed by the shame. Silent, because silence was the only thing that kept my family intact, even though it was already breaking apart from the inside. Silent, because I didn't have the courage to be anything else. And then, when I became a mother, it got worse. My own children grew, and with each passing year, they carried the same blind reverence for him. They didn't know. They couldn't. How could they? They grew up with him as a figure to look up to, the man who put food on the table, who gave them everything they needed. They never saw the side of him that I did, the side that took from me everything I could never give back. My son, Caleb, the first of them all, never questioned it. He never asked why I was so distant, so broken, so cold. He never asked about the man who had fathered him, who had planted a part of his own poison in my womb. The rest of my children, too, Sadie, Rebecca, and the others, they never asked. They never noticed the way I flinched when his name was mentioned, or the way I locked myself away whenever he came around. And when he died, there were no questions. No one said anything about what had happened to me, about the life I had lived in silence. The funeral was quiet, simple. The townsfolk came, mourned him, and went on with their lives, leaving me with the same old ghost. He had never been held accountable, and now, even in death, he was still untouched, still revered by everyone who had ever known him. There was no justice for me, not then, not now. The world never cared to ask. It never cared to know what I had lived through. He had escaped it all. He had gotten away with it. And I was left with the bitter taste of helplessness, left with the knowledge that even though I had suffered, even though I had fought, there would never be justice. There was no reckoning for him, no punishment, just a lifetime of pretending that everything had been fine. There comes a time in every person's life when the weight of it all presses down so hard that you feel like you might crumble under the strain. I remember the moment I realized that my life, my choices, weren't really mine anymore. It was like my own body had betrayed me, trapped me in a world where I couldn't find an escape. I could feel the heavy hands of fate wrapping around my throat, and with each breath I could hear the silent scream in my chest, begging for release. I was married by then, but even that didn't bring the freedom I had dreamed of. I thought it would, you know. I thought that once I was away from my father, away from the house, maybe things would change. But nothing ever changed. He never let me go. No matter where I went, he always found me. His grip on me never loosened. My children were growing up, but I couldn't recognize them. They were all his children, too, and as they grew, they became more like him. They became strangers to me, distant, unreachable. They didn't understand me. They didn't see me as their mother. They didn't see me as anything but a woman who was tied to their father. It was as if every part of me had been erased, replaced by what he had made of me. I thought I could leave. I thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I made my first attempt. I don't know what pushed me to finally act. Maybe it was the years of pain, the constant fear. Or maybe it was just the thought of another day in that prison that made me decide I couldn't stay. I remember the night so clearly. My husband had gone out to run errands, and the house was quiet, too quiet. I took my children one by one, and we packed whatever we could carry, enough to get us through the night. I told myself that once we were out of there, once we were far away, everything would be different. I could find a job, make a life for us. The children would be safe. I could breathe again. But the moment I stepped out that door, the weight of the world came crashing down on me. My heart pounded as I took the first few steps. We had only made it to the edge of the yard when I heard the voice I feared most. "Where do you think you're going?" I froze, my blood running cold. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. I didn't have to look into his eyes to feel the fear take hold of me. It was him, my father. "You can't leave, girl. You think you can just walk away from everything I've given you?" He didn't shout, but his voice was low and threatening, like a snake that had coiled around its prey. He stepped closer, his figure looming in the dark. I wanted to run, to keep going, but the fear paralyzed me. I knew, deep down, that there was no place I could go that would be far enough from him. I knew that no matter how hard I tried, he would always find me, and when he did, the consequences would be worse than ever before. "I need you," he said, his voice cold, but there was something else beneath it, something darker, something that made my stomach turn. "You can't leave me. You belong here, with me, where you always have." I tried to say something, anything, to tell him that I couldn't live like this anymore, that I was so tired, so broken, that I needed to be free. But the words caught in my throat. What could I say? How could I explain that I was suffocating in the very life he had forced upon me? I couldn't explain, not then, and I didn't need to. He already knew. He always knew. I turned back, my shoulders heavy with the weight of defeat. I had failed. I couldn't escape. I couldn't leave. I had tried, but once again, I was trapped. The days that followed were even harder than before. He never let me forget that I belonged to him. He watched me like a hawk, waiting for me to slip, to make one wrong move. He would find me, drag me back to the place I had tried so desperately to leave, and remind me of my place. I would sit in the dark, in my own home, surrounded by the children who didn't know what I had suffered, who couldn't understand why I was always so tired, so distant. The walls closed in on me, and I realized something I had been denying for so long. There was no escape. I had no control over my own life, my choices, my future. They were all dictated by him. And no matter how hard I fought, no matter how much I longed to change, it was always the same. Nothing had changed. And I was no closer to freedom than I had been the day I was born. You know, there are some things a mother should never have to experience. The moment when your children, the ones you brought into this world, the ones you fed and cared for, look at you with disgust, with coldness. It's like a knife twisting in your heart, but the worst part is that they don't even know they're doing it. Or maybe they do, but they don't care. When they were young, I did everything I could for them, everything. I sacrificed pieces of myself just to give them something better, something I could never have. I poured my heart into them, thinking that one day they would understand, that one day they would appreciate what I'd done for them. But the older they got, the more they pulled away. And I don't know why. I think about Caleb. He was my firstborn, the child I thought would be my strength. He was the one I hoped would protect me, that he would understand the weight I carried, and that one day he would stand up for me. But as he grew, something inside him changed. He started to see me differently, not as the woman who had given him life, not as his mother, but as a burden. He didn't want me around. He started to avoid me, to mock me. The way he would roll his eyes when I spoke, the way he'd sigh in exasperation whenever I asked him to help with something, it broke me. It was like my presence embarrassed him. His friends would come over, and I could feel the coldness in the air, like they were all in on a joke I wasn't part of. And when I was around, it was as if I wasn't even there. He would ignore me, pretend I wasn't standing right in front of him. And when I needed him the most, when my health began to fail me, when my legs didn't carry me the way they used to, and the pain in my bones became unbearable, I found that he wasn't there. He wasn't there when I cried out for help. He wasn't there when I needed someone to talk to. He was busy, always busy, with work, with friends, with everything except me. "You're fine, Mom. You don't need me," he'd say, brushing me off like I was just a nuisance in his life. I've got my own life to deal with. But the worst part, the part that still stings in ways I can't explain, he started to resent me. Resent me for being old, for being sick, for being something that reminded him of the things he didn't want to face. He couldn't look at me without seeing the weight of his own inadequacies. He couldn't look at me without feeling disgusted. He couldn't see the woman who had given him everything. All he saw was a burden, and the worst thing about it was that I wasn't the only one. My other children, they were no better. They didn't want me around either. They didn't want to help me. They didn't want to take care of me. I had become a problem to them, a shadow of the woman I used to be. And that was a woman they didn't want to deal with. I can still hear my daughter Talia's voice in my head, the sharpness, the bitterness. "I don't have time for this, Mom. You need to figure it out yourself. You're not a little girl anymore. You need to stop acting like one." Those words, they felt like they tore through my soul. I had never asked for anything from them. Not really. I had never wanted to be a burden. But that's what I had become. A burden, a mistake, a thing to be hidden away, like an old photograph that no one wants to remember. There were days when I'd sit in the corner of the room, listening to their laughter, to their chatter, and it was like a knife cutting through me. They didn't even know what they were doing. They didn't know that each word, each glance was a rejection that burned deep within me. The children I had raised with so much love, with so much sacrifice, now treated me like I was nothing, like I was invisible, like I didn't even matter. I remember one day sitting in the kitchen and Caleb walked in. He looked at me for a moment, and then his gaze shifted away, like he didn't want to see me at all. And when I asked if he needed anything, he snapped, "God, leave me alone, Mom. I don't need you breathing down my neck all the time." The pain, it was suffocating. How could my own son look at me like that? How could he treat me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience? I gave him everything. I gave my children everything I had, and this is what I got in return. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way they avoided me, the way they pretended I wasn't there, the way they left me alone, with my thoughts, with my pain, with my loneliness. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why they didn't see me, why they couldn't see how hard I had tried for them, why they couldn't see that I was still their mother, even if I wasn't the same woman they had grown up with, even if I wasn't the strong, capable woman I used to be. They didn't care. They didn't care about me anymore. And that hurt more than anything, more than all the years of abuse, more than all the pain and suffering. The hardest thing was realizing that my own children, the ones I had given life to, the ones I had given everything for, didn't care about me anymore. They had forgotten. They had forgotten that I was the one who had been there for them, who had wiped away their tears, who had loved them unconditionally. And now I was nothing but an old woman they couldn't be bothered with. It was the final blow to a life that had already been broken. I had spent so many years trapped in a cage I didn't even know how to escape from. My family, the people I had loved, had stripped me of my dignity, and for so long I had allowed it. But there comes a time in every person's life when they realize they've had enough, when they realize that even though the world around them continues to turn, they no longer have to be part of the story that others have written for them. I had lived my whole life as a reflection of their needs, their expectations, their demands. For them, I was just a servant, a provider. I was their mother, their grandmother, the one who could always be counted on to clean, to cook, to give, to love unconditionally. But in return, I received nothing but disdain, nothing but their silence, nothing but their cold, growing indifference. For years, I had been their foundation. But now it was time for them to understand that they could no longer rely on me. I had to let go of the weight they had put on me, the weight of my own self-doubt, of my own dependence. I had to make them see that I was more than just a tool to fulfill their needs. I had to make them feel what I had felt all these years, the emptiness, the coldness, the isolation. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to destroy them. But I needed to restore my own dignity. I needed them to feel what I had felt, the emotional abandonment, the way they had left me to rot in the shadows of their lives. So I began my plan, quietly, methodically. I knew them, after all. I knew their fears, their desires, their weaknesses. I knew exactly how to strike. The first thing I did was cut the financial ties. I had been the one to support them. I had been the one who always made sure the bills were paid, the house was kept, the food was on the table. I had been the one who made sure they had what they needed to survive, but no more. I stopped helping. I stopped giving. And when they came to me, asking for money, for a handout, I turned them away. "You're on your own now," I said coldly. "I've given you everything I had. Now it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." At first, they didn't understand. They were angry, confused. They thought I was being cruel, thought I was punishing them. But the truth was, I was finally standing up for myself. For once, I wasn't going to let them use me as their crutch. I wasn't going to be the one they turned to when they needed something to fix their lives. They thought I was just a frail old woman, helpless, easy to manipulate. But I wasn't. Not anymore. And when they realized that I was serious, that I was no longer the person they had always known to be their caretaker, their eyes began to change. They began to look at me differently, no longer as a means to an end, but as someone they had abandoned, someone they could no longer control. But I didn't stop there. I started to speak the truth. Little by little, I let the secret slip. I told them about the things they didn't want to hear, the things they never bothered to ask. I told them about their father, about the way he had treated me, about the things he had done that they would never know. I told them how I had suffered, how I had been betrayed, how I had been forced to stay silent for so long. They listened, at first with disbelief, then with discomfort. But it was too late. I had already broken the silence, and once the truth had been spoken, it couldn't be unheard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my hands up in rage. I didn't need to. The truth, once spoken, was its own weapon, and I let it do its work. I didn't want them to feel sorry for me. I didn't want them to pity me. But I needed them to understand. I needed them to realize what they had done, what they had taken from me. One day, my son Caleb came to me, his face full of anger. "Why are you doing this? Why are you pushing us away?" "Because I've given you everything I had, Caleb," I said quietly, "and you never once saw me. You never saw what I needed. You never saw the pain I carried every day. You were too busy with your own lives to notice. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being your servant, your support beam. I'm done with all of you." He stared at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and frustration. I knew he didn't understand, not really. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that I had finally found my voice. I had finally made them feel what I had felt for so long. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't the broken woman they thought they could walk all over. I had done what I needed to do to take back control of my life. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I had found something much more important. I had found my freedom. And for the first time in years, I felt peace.